The next presenter, the first presenter of this afternoon, Dr. Sabrina Carvalho. Hello, Sabrina. Thank you for being with us. You can already charge your presentation, please. So, the floor is yours, Sabrina. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sabrina. I'm a postdoc at Methane to Products Division. And today I will present the main results that we have on ceramic membranes for carbon dioxide permeation. The dual-phase membrane can be used to separate the CO2 from other mixture of gases, and it's applicable to reduce the concentration in natural gases and in other gases that will be used in the reaction of methane in other products. But this type of membrane is also very important to the environment because it can be used to capture the CO2, preventing these gases from being released in the atmosphere. And an advantage of this type of membrane is the intermediate operation temperature, since it allows to capture and use the CO2 in the same membrane reactor without the need to cool the gas. So the global objective of this project is to design and build up an experimental arrangement able to separate the CO2 from a gas mixture and to produce clean CO2 from methane in an economic competitive scale. For this, we are developing a new generation of composite membranes with increased electrical conductivity. So this image is a simplified sketch of the membrane. It's formed by a porous conductive oxygen ion ceramic matrix that is filled with a eutectic mixture of molten carbonate. So this matrix can be produced using different methods, such as cold pressing, tape casting, deposition, and many others. But the important thing is that after sintering, it remains porous, so it can be infiltrated by the molten carbonate. And usually, eutectic mixture of carbonates are used to lower its melting temperature. And it's possible to choose the best mixture depending on the temperature of use and the conductivity of each one. So how does the membrane work? The separation mechanism is based on the surface reaction between the CO2 from the feed side with the oxygen ions from the ceramic phase to form the carbonate ion. This carbonate ion is transported through the membrane to the other side, and the reverse reaction occurs, releasing CO2 on the permeated side and the oxygen ions back to the ceramic phase to start the reaction again. So the driving force of this permeation process is the difference of the partial pressure of CO2 on each side of the membrane. So in practice, we can consider that these two phases of the membrane are like parallel to cells with ionic resistors and cell thermodynamic voltage associated. This is a simplified electrical circuit here. And since there is no current flowing outside this electrochemical cell, this formal parallel arrangement, in fact, originates a series type association. And for the CO2 to be transported through the ceramic membrane, the flow of carbonate ion needs to be balanced by a counterflow of oxygen ions. If one of the resistance is higher than the other, the membrane efficiency will be limited by the most resistive component, that in this case is the ceramic phase. So have in mind that the permeation rate of the membrane is limited by the high resistance of the ceramic. To improve the efficiency of the membrane, we need to improve the conductivity. With that in mind, we can think of different strategies to improve the conductivity, such as changing the ceramic materials to be used, or somehow improving the conductivity of these materials, decrease the thickness of the membrane, and maybe change the pore structure in order to decrease the tortuosity, and also study the molten carbonate conductivity and distribution inside the membrane. And so considering these parameters, to improve the conductivity and the permeation, we came up with some strategies in order to improve the final membrane. And today I will present the main results that we have so far on composite membranes prepared by flash sintering and also the results obtained from the preparation of porous ceramic matrix using tape casting and freezing drying techniques, where we could decrease the thickness of the membrane and also change the pore structure. And we also are studying the use of insulating and ionic conductive matrices to investigate the conductivity of the molten carbonates. So first, I will present the results of composite ceramic membranes prepared by flash sintering. The purpose of this work was to obtain the membranes using flash sintering and produce membranes with increased conductivity using lower sintering temperatures and a simplified processing. So the material used for the membrane were Gadolinia-Doped Ceria for the ceramic phase and a eutectic mixture of sodium lithium carbonate for infiltration. And the membranes were prepared by two different methods. The traditional one, where we cold press the mixture of Gadolinia-Doped Ceria with a pore former. Then the pellet was sintered and infiltrated with the molten carbonate. And also the sample produced by flash sintering, where we prepare a mixture of Gadolinia-Doped Ceria with the eutectic mixture of carbonate. This mixture was cold pressed, and the sample was positioned inside between two platinum electrodes that was connected to a power supply, applying an electrical field of 2 volts per centimeter at a temperature of 420 degrees C to produce the dense membranes. This is the Arrhenius plots of the electrical conductivity of those samples. In blue, we have the electrical conductivity of the composite membrane produced by flash sintering, by infiltration in green, and a pure dense Gadolinia-Doped Ceria in red. It's interesting to notice that the electrical conductivity of the dense GDC exhibits most a linear behavior in the entire temperature range, showing that the electrical conductivity of the sample is dominated by the conduction only of oxygen ions. And the ceramic pellets containing carbonate have dominant mechanisms depending on the temperature range. At temperatures below 400 degrees C, the conductivity is basically due to the oxide ions. From 400 to 500 degrees C, the electrical conductivity increases steeply due to the contribution of molten alkaline carbonates. And in upper temperature, the conductivity follows again an Arrhenius behavior, situation ascribed to the carbonate and the alkali ions using molten salt pathway. So the samples produced by electric field assisted sintering in blue showed a higher conductivity than the samples obtained by infiltration, as we can see here. And we do not have yet the permeation results for this type of these membranes produced by this method, but the conductivity results allow us to expect good values. Now the results of the membranes produced by tape casting and freeze drying. These samples were prepared during a period of 6 months that I spent at Forschung Center Jülich in Germany in the first semester of last year. And during this time, it was possible to prepare the samples and begin some characterization of the material. So in this work, we also use the same type of powders, Gadolinia-Doped Ceria as ceramic powder and sodium lithium carbonate to infiltrate. Basically, the samples were prepared by tape casting using rice starch as pore former, and also porous matrices were prepared by freeze drying, which is a technique that uses water and rapid unidirectional freezing to produce those aligned pore structures. Both samples were sintered, infiltrated with molten carbonate, and the permeation tests were performed. So both tape cast and freeze-dried samples had similar values for porosity and skeletal density, but we can see in these same images that the pore structure is significantly different. So the pore structure of the freeze-dried matrix has more aligned pores in one direction, while the tape casted samples has randomly distributed pores. So this is the Arrhenius plot of the electrical conductivity of those samples produced by tape cast in blue and freeze drying in red, with and without the carbonate infiltration. So the behavior of these samples is similar to the results that I have already showed before. We have a linear trend for the samples without the carbonate and 3 different stages for the samples with carbonate infiltration. So what is interesting to notice here is that the freeze-dried samples showed a higher conductivity for both poral support and infiltrated membranes because to their aligned pore structure and consequently lower tortuosity of the charge transport across the transport direction. So aiming for a greater CO2 separation, we used the freeze-dried membranes to produce the permeation, to perform the permeation measurements. Here are the results of the permeance that we obtained. The permeation were performed using 20 volume% of CO2 as feed gas. And the CO2 that permeated was measured during heating and cooling of the membrane between 600 and 850 degrees C. And at 800 degrees, we obtain a good value, a high value of permeance. And it's interesting that the activation energy for permeation, that is the energy necessary to start the formation and the transport of these carbonate ions, lies between the activation energy of the oxide ion and the typical value found for molten carbonate. This indicates that the permeation is in a regime of mixed kinetic control. This means that the permeation is not limited either by the carbonate phase or by the ceramic matrix. And this table shows the flux and the CO2 permeation data from different studies. And considering that the efficiency of the membrane depends on its thickness, on gas composition, and the gas composition of the feed and the permeated side, the permeation data were compared considering the permeability of the membranes in each experiment. So the membranes produced by freeze drying, despite presenting the second highest flux of CO2, showed the highest permeability values at 600 degrees C when temperature, membrane thickness, and CO2 partial pressure are considered. And our last result is, this is an image of a study that are being developed by a PhD student of our group, which attempts to study the conductivity of the carbonate and the entire membrane using different ceramic matrices. In this case, it is a zirconia-doped with magnesium oxide.
1 minute.
Infiltrated, okay, infiltrated with sodium potassium carbonate. And impedance measurements are being performed to analyze the conductivity, and the permeation tests will be performed later in the chamber that we have available in the lab. And to summarize, we obtained the membranes were successfully obtained by flash sintering at a temperature of 420 degrees C. And those samples have higher electrical conductivity than the membranes obtained by infiltration. And in the study of freeze drying membranes, we obtained the side-to-side aligned porosity of the samples prepared by freeze drying had a significant impact on the electrical properties of these composite membranes. We could improve the conductivity. We achieve a high permeance value of this membrane, and these results show that the freeze drying is a suitable technique to scale up the production of efficiency composite membranes for CO2 separation and capture. This is our team that are currently working the project 10 of a methane to product division. Professor Reginaldo Mucilo is the co-PI, Dr. Eliana Mucilo, Professor Fernando Marques from Universidade of Aveiro, Rafael is the PhD student, and Ione França is the technician from our lab. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm sorry about the time.
Thank you very much, Sabrina, for a nice talk. Very interesting results. People are still very shy after lunch. We have no questions coming from the audience, but eventually what you just presented us is showing that when you talk about the conductivity, it's the overall conductivity of your membranes, and your membranes, they need to transport oxygen ions to one side and carbonate ions to the other side. Exactly. Do you have measured, or how could we find out which one is the sort of the rate limiting step of your system? Which one is the less conductive or the higher conductive of your phases? So which one of them would be the one that is limiting the CO2 separation process?
Yes, in this case is the ceramic phase, and that's why we were trying to increase this conductivity. We cannot change too much the composition because we need to have the reaction. We need to occur the reaction. So if we increase too much the carbonate to compensate the difference in conductivity, we don't have any more the reaction. So we need to improve the conductivity of the ceramic phase to improve the overall transportation.
All right. So that's why it's also so important to control those microstructures. So this is beautiful material science when you're really trying to channel across the membranes the oxygen ion transport, right?
Yes.
Very nice. And I know that some of those results, they just been submitted to the Journal of Membrane Science, right?
Yeah.
And that your Arrhenius measurements were not made here in Brazil, right? Those were made in Germany as well, at Jülich.
Yes, exactly. They were made last year, the last days of me there. But we have good results from these experiments.
And the big question is, when are you going to be measuring those permeants here in Brazil in our labs?
I already arranged the system. We have 3 atmosphere chamber that are ready to use. I dense alumina just to check if there was any leakage, and everything is good to go. Now we can begin the test using the membranes, but we still didn't perform any test. But everything set.
Okay, very nice. So good luck in the next steps. So good luck in the next steps, and thank you very much for your talk today, Sabrina.
Thank you.